Okay, so today is Wednesday, July 28th, making it through the month of July. Today we're going to be talking about authentication. So again, we covered this in Django. It's a very similar process. So we're going to be doing it with our React front end and our mock server that's running. Also today we're going to be talking about the context API. So this is another React topic. Again, it's one of those functional hooks that we mentioned. So we're going to kind of understand that a little better, maybe try to employ that inside of our new site project. Okay, so let's kind of just dive right into it. So new site 6, I have already forked it over, cloned it down to my machine, and done an npm install. So we saved like a minute of our life there. So here you go. I have my server running, so that's good. And again, this is just new site 5 implementation. So my homepage, there's an add article page. So hopefully you guys got that to work yesterday with your new site 5. I know a couple of you guys had issues, but hopefully you guys were able to resolve them. Does our search still work? Yep, search still works there. Cool. All right, so let's go on from here. Let's read our README, make sure we know what we want to do. So again, we're gonna use this context API, so we'll talk about that. If you guys want to read about it, I assume this is a link to something useful. Yep, React docs talking about context. But we'll talk about it also. Okay, so let's see, single page app authentication overview. So there's a block here that talks about what's kind of going through the process. So let's actually see a visual of this. So we do have something we can look at. All right, so basically just kind of review what goes on between client and server during the authentication process. So client is basically your browser, and a server is some web server living who knows where. When you are trying to log into like a website, might be Facebook, might be Amazon, whatever, you're gonna type in a username and a password. All right, you're gonna send that data from a form, and it's gonna be sent via post request. So again, Tom covered the HTTP methods yesterday about posts. So get, post, put, and delete. Hopefully you guys are familiar with when you're supposed to use those. Again, for our use cases, we normally just use get and post. So post kind of handles the put and delete. We just say, hey, post, and then determining from where we're sending our post, we'll basically do an update or delete or create, depending on that. Anyway, regardless, we send a post request to the server. The server has access to the database and the master records. So the server will check your username and password against some authority it has, and then we'll respond with a token, assuming that your login was correct. If it's not correct, obviously it's gonna say, hey, you have a wrong username and password or something like that. But if you log in successfully, you should get a success response, and your server will actually pass back a token object to your client, so to your browser, or to your application, wherever it might be. So we get that token, and then it is the job of the client to actually keep track of that token from that point on. So the server has provided some tokens saying, hey, I know you authenticated yourself. Let me give you like this little piece of basically like a key that says, hey, I know that you're legit now. So the client will take the token, store it somewhere in the application, and then any other operation we want to do, for example, let's say we want to only allow authenticated users to add articles, right? We don't want any old Joe to come in and just add articles to our data. In that case, you need to log in first. And then once you have a token, any other update request you do to the server, you need to provide a token value. So in this case, your header information will contain authorization and then the value of that token that you got back. So now when we're trying to add an article, we're going to pass a token with that request, with that post request, and the server will be like, okay, you don't have to log in each time you want to do something. The server is going to be like, all right, you gave me a token. That token was legit because I'm the one that created it. And then assuming that it verifies a token, it'll add the article for you. If not, that's where you should see that 401 error saying unauthorized. So your server should respond, hey, if the token was not legit, you'll probably get some error in that case. But in a normal case, if the token was legit and the post request was successful, your server should respond saying, hey, everything went well. You were authorized and this operation was successful. All right, so a bit of bouncing back and forth between client and server. So just to review, you log in, you get a token back, you send the token with every request that requires authorization to the server, and the server will validate that token. Right. So again, when you're making orders on Amazon, you're not typing your username and password every time you're trying to make an order, right? Once you log in one time, you're good to go. Any questions about the authentication process? Nope. Okay, so I think we saw this yesterday, but this is what's going on with examples. So won't focus on this. I think Tom went over this yesterday. Yes. I get a thumbs up, thumbs down.
He didn't talk about. He talked about the process, but
okay.
Like, can you talk about what's unique to the authentication piece in these?
Yeah. So for our needs, so these code snippets are going to be what you're going to be seeing for our new site. So when I think we implemented the login API, but now we're actually going to use it. Once the server
we just made a page that did a console log of like user name and or email and password. There was no like API.
Gotcha. Okay, so we're going to do that today. Thank you. Yeah. So in this case, we're going to send a login request. In this case, API/authenticate is going to be where we're sending a post request and then we have a username and password we send. The server is going to have some data in there with username and passwords. Assuming that you successfully log in, you'll get something that looks like this. So you get you get an ID. This ID is what your token is. So notice it's some random generated string that's super long. That's going to be hard to guess. So obviously you don't want a token that's just like 2 characters because anyone can crack that. This is, I don't even know how long this is. I'm going to guess 32 characters. Maybe, I think actually 64 characters around there. But anyway, yeah, so that's the main piece of information we care about. The rest of this is not really that useful to us. I mean, it contains a username. We'll probably use some of this with our application, but the token, the ID value here is what you want to inspect when you get a response from the server. So we'll take a look at that when that happens. And then from that point on, you're logged in. You have a token. So your client, anytime it's sending some I guess, update to the server, it's going to provide this authorization header and that token value. So this token should match that ID value from above here. All right, so let's actually, before we go, does that kind of make sense what we're going to do? Again, we'll come back to this slide when we're actually sending API requests and looking at the data. Let's actually do that right now. I think probably a good time to do it. So let's go back to our README. So that we covered, what that process is going through. So this block, you want to read it over. But let's go for an initial setup. So I kind of already did this piece. Let's see. I just chose the whatever it came with new site 6. I didn't implement my own source files, but generally we recommend working with your own source files because that's kind of nice to see that iteration of your own project. Obviously, you don't want to add styling each time. So once you perform the steps above, run npm install start. Yep, did that. So my server's running. Now we're getting to the user API login. All right, so we're going to be adding a new API file called users API to our API folder on our client project. It looks like I actually missed a step. So reading goes a long way. I need to run update app. So let's do that. So currently, if you download this file, if you go to source API, I guess I have that. All right, that's good. Test. All right. So I did not run update app, but I still have the files I needed. Okay, so inside the users API module, we should create a function called login. Right, so there's a stub dot function here. So we have a login function that takes in a credentials object. We're going to use that credentials object to actually send authorization or authentication requests to the server. All right, so that's what we're going to be implementing here. Get rid of this. Can do that. All right, important to know, our mock server already has user logins created. So when you're doing this project, you're going to have to use this login. So the email address is going to be john@doe.com. Let me make this bigger. So it's going to be john@doe.com. Password's going to be open sesame. If you actually want to see where this is stored, you can actually do it because again, we have our mock server running. If you go to the API_server folder. So this is the server logic. Open that up. There should be a server folder. Under that, there's a boot folder. So again, there's a lot of files here. Don't expect to navigate through this or mess with it, but if you're curious, in the boot folder, there's a sample-model.js. In here, we have a few users that get created. So we have John, John at doe.com, password open sesame. We also have Jane at doe.com, open sesame, and then Bob at projects.com and open sesame. So you can change these. So let's say I want to add, if I wanted to add a new one, I could. But I'm just going to go with what this server has. All right. So John at doe.com and open sesame will be our credentials. Okay. So let's move on from server. All right. So users API, what do we need to do here? This function should create a request that's almost identical to API, the articles API, add article. So we can maybe copy that code over and work from it. When users API.login is called, a post request should be made to this location. So I'm going to copy that. The credentials object should be stringified and passes a body request. And there's unit test that verifies the expected behavior. Okay, let's see if we can do this. So we're taking in a credentials object eventually. We're going to need to submit a request. So as the README kind of hinted, it's going to be really similar to our add articles. So if I go to my articles API, I'm going to copy this over. Go to my users API and paste that here. All right. So base URL is going to be different for your login. So make sure you're updating that in the users API. So I'm going to create const base URL. And then I think I copied it from, oh, I lost that copy, of course. Over here. So it's HTTP localhost 3001 API/user/login. So I'm going to copy that, paste that in here. Okay, so that's my base, sending that here. Headers JSON method posts. So in this case, we don't have article object, we have credential object as our input. So we got to obviously match that. Okay, so that's our login function. Let's actually test it out and see what we're getting back here. So I'm actually going to change the structure of this just because I prefer the async await and it's easier for me to work with. So here, I'm going to, what do I want to do here? So let's do async. Again, you don't have to do this. I'm just choosing to do it. So I'm going to change the structure of this. I'm going to do a fetch. So let response equal this fetch. I guess the way I'm looking at this right now, this is returning a promise. So I'm going to be changing that, but for now, I want it to work. Let's see. This is my fetch. And then here, I'll do let data equal response.json. Again, we've hopefully seen this pattern before, where we get the response, we want the JSON out of it. And then let's do a console.log of our data. Okay, and then we should probably check if the response okay. So if not response.okay, maybe console.error not a valid response. Any questions? What we're doing here? So again, we're sending a post request to the specified endpoint. In this case, it's /API user/login. And then we're just going to see what data we get back from the server before we proceed.
Hey, Ankur.
Yep.
So if you have an await with your response, why do you also need an await with the data to get response.json?
Great question. The reason being is because that JSON method is also asynchronous. So we go back to response fetch API, should be the first result. So the documentation here will kind of give us a hint as to why we need to await. So here it says returns a promise. So again, anytime you get a promise returned, you need to, again, the promise guarantees a result, but doesn't guarantee when it's going to complete. So yeah, .json is going to return a promise that resolves whenever it does resolve, you get the JSON data back. So the answer to that is we get response.json returns a promise. We need to wait on that promise to resolve before we can actually look at the data. But good question there. So yeah, we're doing two awaits here. The fetch will give you an HTTP response, and then the JSON will get you the actual data contained in that response. Yep, good question there. All right, so let's actually see what gets printed out. But we also obviously need to trigger this login. So I'm going to go to the login page. That is in pages. We have a login page. So currently, your handle form submit should be similar to this, where we're preventing default. Again, this is important because if you don't have event.prevent default, your page is actually going to refresh and you're going to kind of lose your initial data. But we're printing out the values from the form. So let's actually call our API here. So to do that, again, looking at my export is export default login. I changed that. It was login before. I think something like this. I'm not sure what that does for me, but I'm just going to keep that as that. And then in my login page, I'll import user's API. Again, you can call this whatever you want to call it. It does not have to match the name of your file, but just for consistency, I will match it from. Then I'm going to find the API. So that's 2 levels up, maybe. Nope, 1 level up. All right, so we have user API, and that should be it. So API/user API. To be clear, I'm actually going to do this for example. I'm just going to name this UA for user API. Again, this is just whatever I want to name it. So if I name it UA, that's what I use to reference the login function. Okay, so here, export default is returning this object, right? We're familiar with objects. It has something called login. So that's what we're tapping into over here, login. So login requires a credentials object. So this object we can build here quickly. So let's do let creds equal an object, and we need to pass it a username. So the username in this case is john@doe.com. I need to verify this is username or email. So always good to make sure we're doing the correct thing. Okay, so it looks like we need to pass email and password, not username. So always good to check that. So here we have.
Did you mean John instead of Joe?
Yes, sorry. Thanks. You guys are great at catching my errors. So email and password.
Open sesame.
Open. Thank you. Okay, so we should be grabbing that off the form. I guess we could do that if we have email and password. Yep. So assuming that these are correct, working correctly, we could do that easily. So let's do let email equal this goodness. Let password equal that goodness. Email. Okay, so we just store that here. Email is going to be your email variable, and password is going to be your password. To be clear, this is not a variable. This is our key that is called email. This email is our actual value. So if we want to actually make it more clear, we can name these to email value. Password, we don't have to. But again, just for clarity, it's always kind of good not to have the same name can be used in different ways. So we'll have email value, password value. All right, let's actually check that out. So creds is this object, and we're going to pass that into our login function. All right, any question what's going on here? We're just taking the values from our form, putting it into this object, and then sending that, passing that object along to our login function.
Yeah, can you go to your user's API file real quick? I just want to see it. Okay, thank you.
So we're taking a credentials object. Again, I changed what this function was doing previously. I want to make that clear. Previously, it was just returning a promise. It was returning this fetch was a return value. I changed it so I could just kind of do this logic here. I guess I probably could get away with without doing that. But I'm going to go through with this since I've committed to it. So there we go. Let's go to our login page. Does anyone remember the route for it? The login? Yeah, all right, cool. It is login. Email is john@do.com. And password was open sesame. Let's submit. Now let's bring up our console so we could inspect what we get back. All right, there's our console. Let's hit submit. All right, there we go. So this is the printout from when we're sending, capturing the values from our input. So we got john@do.com, open sesame. And then we got a response. This is our data that we got back. So again, we parsed the response and then we parsed the response for the JSON. So this is the JSON data contained within that response from our mock server. So if you kind of can see these fields here, we have created. So there's a created date, looks like date and time, which is probably some time zone. I'm not sure what time zone this would be. I guess probably Greenwich Mean Time or something. Regardless, I don't care about the created date. What I care about is the ID. So here we got an ID value back of some long string. So if you guys can kind of see this here, this is my token now. This is what the server has provided me saying, hey, all right, I authenticated you. Let me give you some tokens so you can use that token to make future requests and I can authorize you easily. I'm also passing you back this user object that has the email, the ID of the user. So again, this is just additional data our application might want to use. Also a username. So in this case, the username for this user is just John. Okay, so that's what your data should look like. And then now that we kind of verify that that looks good, we can actually use this token to implement some functionality here. So for now, I'm going to go to my add an article page. And let me try to add an article and see if that works. So let's go with Lion King by Disney, abstract, maybe the best movie or Disney. I don't know, there might be other contenders. I think Aladdin's fantastic. Little Mermaid, always a good one. What else do we have? Beauty and the Beast. I think those are the 4 from the 90s I remember. Anyway, maybe best Disney classic. Let's submit. All right, notice we get an error. Authorization required. So we're trying to make a request right now because we've not quite logged in. We did do that mock login, but we've not actually stored this token. So this token is not being used. So the server from its viewpoint saying, hey, you didn't send me a token, you're not authorized, or you haven't been authenticated. So I don't know who you are. I'm not going to trust your articles that you're trying to send to me. So we got an authorization required error. Let's actually find where that's coming from. Let's see. So we went to add article here. Prevent default. Again, remember, you want to do that or your page will refresh. We tried to create an article. We called add article, got a response. We did not get a 200. So in that case, this is where we're getting the alert from. So we did not get a 200 message. We could actually see what message we got. So I'll print out the status, easily do that. It's probably going to be a 401 if I had to guess, because that's the typical response for unauthorized. All right, let's try again. Let's just do X, Y, Z. All right, there we go, 401. All right, so we are not currently authorized to get into it. If I want to actually make that request, what if I just copy the string and pass it to my endpoint? So I'm going to copy this. Maybe I should try to log in again. Let's try the login page. I want to see if that string will change. So login, email would be john@do.com, and password would be open sesame. Submit. Let's look at our console. Do we get some token back? And it's the same. All right, we have this object. All right, so we get a new token.
Hey, Encore.
Yep.
When I did the login thing, I kept getting, I don't see the token being created.
Okay. Yeah, again, it's gonna be hard to troubleshoot, but we won't take it one-on-one. So I should have mentioned this for past lectures and probably this lecture. We're not expecting you to code along with us. Just want to make sure you understand the concepts, and your challenge for the day will be to code. So again, don't expect or don't try to keep up with our lecture coding because it's going to go quickly, and then you kind of might get lost and not like, again, we want you to be focusing on the topics rather than trying to code and get working. But you are welcome to try to code. I'm just going to say it might not be easy to follow along at our pace. What error are you getting? Do you get some error message?
Let's see. I get the post, the localhost, the basically the base URL, and it's not giving me the like 400 bad requests or something like that.
Okay, I would check what endpoint you're sending to, and then I would check the structure of your object. So make sure your object is structured like this. Make sure you have an email key and a password key, and then the values should be what you get from the form. So this credentials object should look like this or something like this, and then you want to pass that to your login function.
Okay, I see my mistake.
Okay, cool, great. All right, we'll continue on. All right, so we get this token. So I'm gonna kill my previous page. I'm gonna copy this token. I guess, how do I do this best? All right, I'm gonna copy this token, go to the add article page. No, I can't do that manually. Just trying to figure out how I could hack this in here. Okay, so if I add articles, we do need to change something in add articles API. So currently, this is where our add article looks like. We need to add a new section here. So let's go to our README and see what that's about. So again, we went through this process. You should get something that looks like this back if you're successful. Namely, the ID is what we care about. You want to call users API login. All right, we'll talk about React context. Okay, it looks like that's what they're doing. Just gonna scan this and then add article. Okay, cool. Let's actually follow along with the curriculum page. So it looks like they're diving into context. So we will also. So let's just kind of understand high level what we need to do here. Login page. Login page. Here, we should be getting a response. I'm actually going to change my code. So apologies if you're trying to follow along. I know I'm probably giving you guys headaches. In this case, I'm just going to return this fetch. So I don't need this to be async. All right, so this is going to return a promise. Again, remember, fetch returns a promise. So we're returning a promise out of login. So now in my login page, I can do what I was doing before. In that case, we'll get let response equal that. Then response promise dot then. So we're not in an async function right now. So I'm going to use dot then. We could actually make this async, and since I prefer that, I'm going to go with that. Actually, I'll leave it to you guys. What do you guys want to see? Do you guys want to see async await, or do you guys want to see more of dot then?
Dot then is my vote. I've been using a lot of async. It's always cool to see the converse.
Absolutely. Thanks for suggesting it. So yeah, so I won't change this to async. So since it's not an async function, you cannot use the wait keyword. Those are go hand in hand. If you try to use it, you'll get an error saying, hey, can't use await, the keyword await outside of a non-async function or inside of a non-async function. So here I get promise with some typos. What else would be new? All right, so response promise dot then. Okay.
I have a question. What did we just delete previously?
So I changed my login function back to just to return whatever fetch is returning. Previously, I was processing the fetch, waiting for it to resolve, and then resolving the JSON. Now I'm just returning straight up the fetch call for my login. This is what it was before. So I modified the design before. I want to return it back to its initial state. So returning the fetch here, and then now in login page, which is calling the login method, I'm going to call login with the credentials just like before, but keep in mind, I'm getting a promise back from that function now because it fetch returns a promise. Hopefully that's ingrained in your mind. I get a promise back. I need to do a dot then, and then once this promise is resolved, it will execute what's in my dot then. So it's going to pass back a response. So I'll likely name it response. Again, you don't have to name this response. I want to make that clear. It's just a variable that you're passing to a function. In this case, I want to do something, and that something is if response.okay. So again, similar to what we just had before, let's return response.json. All right, the return value from this .then can be changed to another .then because we're returning another promise. Remember, response.json is going to return you another promise. Therefore, another then, sorry, tongue twister a little bit. The return here is going to be processed by this .then. So we're going to get some data back. And again, I can name this whatever I want. Name this some data just to change it up. And then once we get that passed to us, we can take it and do console.log of some data. All right, so want to verify that I didn't break what I was doing before, but essentially this should do the same exact thing we were doing before, where we had the async awaits inside of our login function. So since I said that, let me just verify that I didn't break anything. Going back to login, good here, john@do.com, open sesame, submit. All right, so yep, still got some structure back, so I didn't break anything by that refactor. But now our login page is the one that actually gets access to the data. So now that we have some data, we can actually do something with it. And what we want to do with it is actually store that token. So for this, I'm going to create a user object. So let's create a user object. Let's user info equal, let's say token will be some blank value to start. Let's say we want to grab the username. What else? Username, email, and that's all. Maybe user ID. I'm not sure if we care about user ID, but hey, why not? Okay, so we have those. Now that we have some data, assuming that it's correct, we could do user info dot token, and we just gotta make sure we extract the data correctly. So looking at the structure of our data, it's an object. It has a key of ID, so that's what I'm going to use as my token. This can be some data.id. Let me bring this up so it's centered. All right, so some data is an object. It has a field of ID, which is what I'm storing as token. What else do we have? We have user info. We want to get the username. So we'll do username. That'll be some data, but how do we actually get that username? So we need to make sure we look at it correctly. So there's, oops, that refreshed. That's all right. I'm just gonna go back to my README page. It's easier that way. So we have this object. ID is your token. Notice that username is nested within another object here. So I got to do user.username to get the username out of that. Likewise for email and ID. So I'm choosing to store my data this way. You don't have, you have the freedom to store your data as you wish, but I just want to pull out the items here instead of copying that user object. So we'll do that quickly. Email, and finally user info dot, what was the last thing? ID, user ID equals some data user.id. Okay, so this is my representation of the data I got back. I'm actually not keeping track of everything, right? I'm dropping like the title created, just converting this to what I care about. So I'm doing that here in this then, and then I should be able to print it out. Here. So if I do a console log, say my data, and we'll do user info, is what I called it. All right, let's quickly do this and see what it looks like so we can work from there. So if I log in, I wish I could automate this process. John@do.com, open sesame, submit. All right, so notice we got our response from the server was this object. My data is going to be structured a little differently. I have email, token, user ID, and username. So that's what my application will be working with. All right, so my question for our glorious audience here is, login page has our token. This is probably the most important piece here. Login page has it. add article page needs, excuse me, needs it, right? Because for our 8 articles API, we need to add a new header section. So I'm kind of go ahead in our challenge. We need to add authorization. Again, it must be named this because this is what the server is looking for. And we need some token value here. So not sure, token. All right, we can pass this as part of the article objects, but probably easier because that's not going to be passed here. So we're going to pass a new value called token, and that token is what you need to send in the headers authorization section. Okay, so the question for my audience is, the login page has this information. All right, we have the token successfully after we log in. How do we get that information or get that token to our add article page so that when we actually add an article, we can pass a token here?
Same way we did with like the search bar, where you're passing that object through like props and states.
Yep. Jack kind of remembers for one of our examples, when we moved the search bar to a different location, we had to basically pass value up, as in from the child component up to like the master parent. When I say master parent, I mean the common parent between your 2 components you're trying to communicate with. Because there's no way for that, no easy way for the login page to directly communicate with the add article page. They don't know about each other. They're siblings from a different, like they're related to the same parent, but they're not directly talking to each other. So that's why you got to pass your data up to your parent, and your parent can pass it down to any other child component. Does that idea or that visual kind of make sense? So our login page needs to get information, which it does when it logs in, take that information and pass it to a common parent. The parent will later pass down a token to our add article component via, what's the magic word? How is it going to actually pass it down? What's the type of value it's going to pass parent to child?
Props.
Props. Yep. Props is the magic word there. So this token will be passed as a prop value down to add article page. Okay, so let's actually implement this. So let's go to where I want to go. Let's go to our app.js and look at what's going on here. So we have homepage, login page, add article page. So here are the 2 components in question. We have login page. Login page wants to send something to add article page. We can't do that directly, so that's where the parent gets involved. So the parent, I'm going to create a state here. So we're a class-based component, so we'll do a state equals, here I'm going to say user info, and that's going to be set to something eventually. So I'm going to default it to null. Why doesn't it like this? Okay, that's good. Then as a prop, I want to pass it down to add article page. Right, so if you remembered, we went through this, I think, for the search bar. We need to actually maybe structure this a little differently. So let me see if I could hack this quickly. Or not hack it, but remember how to do it. So I'm actually going to go to router React. I have to get to my, there we go. So I did something on, what was it, Monday, where we, sorry, let me get to this page, link. Or yeah, so on Monday, if you remember, I used something called render. So if I go find render somewhere on this page, yeah. So I did something like this, where instead of doing component equals, I changed the components. I guess
to render and pass some props in too.
Yep. So that's the way I did it before. I think there's a different way to do it, so maybe we could figure that out quickly. Yeah, so another way to do it is like this. You actually nest what you want to route inside of your route component. So if I do that, let's quickly do that for login page, or let's do it for add article page. So I'm going to take the component out of here and now make this like a more typical component we deal with, where we have a closing component. So route needs to be closed. All right, so whatever is in between here is what's going to be rendered. So I could do add article page as my component. And then this is going to take in a new prop value. That prop value is going to be, let's just say user info. And that's going to be set to this.state.user info, right? So that's the state value I created above. So now the parent is going to tie that state value and pass it down as a prop to our add article page. All right, make sure you have your closing bracket here. And okay, so question is this actually going to pass it down? Well, the answer is, let's find out. So here, I'm just going to print it out here. So here I should have something, access something called this.props.userinfo .token. Okay, sorry. Is this gonna be an issue for me? The answer was yes, because keep in mind that initially for my value, I set it to null. So it's gonna pass a null value down as user info. If I do that, my article page is trying to extract some .token value, but if user info is null, that's gonna be an error. So always remember you need to check your data. So if I want to do something like this .props.user info, if that is legit, then give me my token. If not, let's say no token was found. All right, and then all I want to do here is do a console log, console.log, and show me my token. Or we can even do an alert. Alerts are a little annoying, but they're quicker to view. So I'll do an alert here. Okay, so let's actually see, this is part 1 of 2. There's 2 things we need to do. We need to pass up the token from login page to the parent, which we've not done yet. The second part is we need to pass down the token from our parent to our child app. So I'm doing that first. That's a little easier. So here, the question is, do we actually get a token? Let's see. So I'm going to go to my console. Don't want that. Let's go just to add article page and see what turned out. So I should expect, if I did this correctly, I should see no token found in my as an alert, but I did not get an alert because I need to actually submit an article. So I do X, Y, Z, submit. All right, notice we got no token was found. So we are correctly, like we're successfully passing something down from our parent to child. But in this case, nothing interesting is being passed. All right, what if we hard coded that? So what if I did something like app.js? Let's create something for our user. So let's actually provide a token value and say, let's say 123 is our token. Again, not a secure token there, but just for our testing purposes. Let's make it 123. So if I save this, I just want to verify that my child component is getting the token. So if I refresh, we don't need to refresh. I do X, Y, Z, submit. Notice we get 123. So again, that's thumbs up in passing props down from a parent component to our child. So we're passing info as we want to. Okay. Then our next task is we need to pass this up from our login page. Let me hear from some of you guys. So heard from Jack, heard from Steven. Let's go with Andrew. How's it going, Andrew?
Cool.
All right, good to hear. How did that spaghetti night turn out?
We switched to something else.
Oh, what did anyone take your offer of showing up? That'd be
No, I was waiting here, and no one showed up.
Gosh, well, I mean, they would have been disappointed if they came all that way for spaghetti and you guys are like, well, no, we're having pizza instead. So,
That's true.
all right, cool.
If you switched it, cereal Anker would have come.
Yeah, cereal is always a good point. All right, so Andrew, my question to you is, we accomplished task 1 or 1 of 2, which is passing info down. How do we actually get info from the login page up to this point so that we can actually set the correct token value after we log in? Do you have any ideas?
Okay, so I would assume if you passed it down, that would be through this props and the token value.
Yeah, so we are getting a token value here. So we are passing it down to our add article component. But my question to you is, our login page actually has the valid token. So login page gets the token from the response. My question here is, how do we actually get that token value that the login page has and store it in our app? component.
Um,
So our app
import-
component is our parent that's passing something down to our add article page.
I would think either an export import or save it to props with the other one and pass the props in,
Um,
but.
not quite. So the export import, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Could you clarify?
By setting a method and exporting the method into the apps.js from the login page.
I think you're on the right idea. So here, what we want to do is pass login page a callback function. So the way we do that is by rendering the login page. So I'm going to get rid of this and then do the same thing I did for my add article page. I'm going to nest this in my routes. All right, and the reason I'm doing this is because I want, I think I actually messed something up, but I'll do it later. Here I want login page, and I want to pass it some additional data. So in this case, I want to pass it a handle, set user. Let's call it set user info. Set user info, and now I want my user info to be set by login page. All right. So the easiest way I could do it is basically. Sorry, I'm in trouble speaking. I need to slow down. All right. I want to pass some function down to the login page so that the login page, when it's ready, can call this function and tell me what the token value is or whatever the user info stuff is. So the way to do that is we pass it down a prop down to the login page, and that's going to be a function that can be called. In this case, the easiest way to do it is by passing down this dot set state and sorry, an anonymous function that takes in user info, and that's going to pass it to our set state function, and we're going to update user info here. Not what I want to copy user.
Hey, Ankur, just to clarify, you just declared that set user info, right?
This, yes, that is a name. Yeah, that's a prop we're passing. So again, when you're creating props, you can name them pretty much whatever you want. There's a few limitations. You can't use some reserved keywords like key and ID or something. But for the most part, you can pass in, I think ID is actually kosher. You can pass in, actually, ID might not be kosher. So ID and key you can't use. But for the most part, you can name this whatever you want. So if I want to name it donuts, I can name it donuts. Usually not a great variable name unless we actually have donuts on hand. But I'm gonna, yeah, I called set user info. I made that name up on the spot. Set user info is taking a function, anonymous function here. What it's expecting is this function takes in one parameter called user info. To be clear, I could make this info and set info here. So we have different naming. All this is doing is going to call this dot set state and update my user info up here. Okay, and this needs to be an object. That's why it's yelling at me. All right, so we have a lot of nested curly braces, maybe not the easiest to see here. So I could break this apart, or if I want to make it a little easier to read, maybe do something like that. So again, we take in info and we'll just update our user info directly.
So another question. So would you be able to define this function on the login page file and then just invoke it on this on the app file just to have like a little bit of, I don't know, I guess cleaner code?
Could you elaborate on that idea?
Yeah. So the set user info, and then you pass it the anonymous function. Would
Okay.
you be able to define that anonymous function within the login page file, and then just still have the set user info equal, and then pass it the function there, if that makes any kind of sense?
No, you lost me a bit. I do want to understand here. So you're saying instead of doing this, could you kind of guide me what I should write?
Yeah. So like on your login page.js,
Okay.
would you be able to create the function here and then pass it through the app.js?
Nope. So you can't solely create that function in the login page because the app.js is the holder of user info here. So we need, this is a state value, so it's internal. App.js is the only one that can truly update user info via a set state call. So we're doing the set state call here because we want to update this piece of information. So basically the login page has the information for us. We want to grab the information and store it in our app level. And the reason we want to store it at our app level is because we need to pass it down to our add article page. So again, this is going upstream, as in login page has info and wants to pass it up towards our parent, which is app. Once app has it, it's going to pass it back down to add article page.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was a little mixed up with like the props in the states, but yeah, nope, that makes sense now.
Gotcha. No, I'm glad you asked. Again, always ask questions if you're confused or have a different idea. Always love to hear from you guys. But yep, thanks, Reno. All right, so we're passing this function called set. It's going to be a prop called set user info. So now that we have that prop hopefully available to us, I go to login page. Now, when we have our data, instead of simply logging it, we could also pass it to our parent. So the way we do that, question for, let's go with Sean Kernan. How do I actually invoke that function that I passed?
What was the name of it again?
It was set user info.
So then it's just this .props .function name with should be user info. I think we were passing just the token, right? User info .token.
Yep. Sean has it. So the magic here is this .props will contain that new prop that you created. So set user info was the name I gave to that prop. So that's the function I'm going to invoke here. And here I'll pass user info. All right. So now we're successfully linking our login page to our app page, at least linking it in the sense where we can pass information to our app, which is a parent component to the login page. Okay. So given that, let's test this out. So end goal should be, we should have access to the token in our add article page. So now instead of having a dummy value, which we were doing before, dummy value was 1, 2, 3. Let's actually set that to empty, or I think I had null here. All right, so let's actually see this in play, and if this works, hopefully we see that token in our add article page. So I'm going to go to login. And login again. Let me bring up my console so we can snoop on some of the values we're printing out here. Okay, so login as john@doe.com, open sesame, submit. What do we get? All right, so my data looks like this, right? Notice, again, I'm not going to memorize this, but the first 3 letters are X, H, and uppercase X, all right? So that's going to be what my token should be if it's correct. Now, if I go to the add article page, and now I'm going to try to add article X, Y, Z. Obviously, we're not going to be successful, but we just want to see what token was passed down to the add article page. So hit submit. Notice what my output is. It starts with XH capital X. That matches what my token was initially. So that's another 2 thumbs up. I guess the first one should be 1 thumbs up for doing one part of it. Now we have 2 thumbs up, where the login page is appropriately making a request to log in, getting a token back from the server, taking that token value, passing it up to the app component, which is the parent component. And then the second part, the second thumbs up, is the app component is successfully passing down that token information down to the add article page. So the add article page has access to it. All right. We should definitely take a break here, but before we do, what questions do you guys have about those 2 pieces that I just talked about? Sending information up to a parent and then sending information down from a parent.
So you can only use the set state on the app.js for like the parent element. Okay. And then you just invoke it with this .props on the child element.
Yep. The reason I could invoke it via this .props is because I'm passing it down. So just to be clear, I chose this. I'm not sure if this is the best design, but it's the cleanest design. I could easily do something like create a function here, update user info. Again, I'm not sure what's preferred. I prefer this just because it's, again, very simple and that's all I want to do. But I could do something like this and just do, console, or I could move this here. X. Again, I don't know if this makes it easier to understand or just adds another layer of indirection, but in this case, I could do something like updates user info, but of course I need my this.
All right. Yeah, that makes it a little bit easier to understand.
Okay, yeah. So
cool.
Yeah, so again, set state should only be called by app, and that it was doing it before and after. In this case, If this makes it a little easier, we have some function. Again, this function can do multiple things. It could just do a console log for us if we wanted to. But yeah, so the real logic is being done by the app. All we're telling our login page is, hey, we're going to provide you some function that you can call that I will handle for you. So login page can call this function, and that function will be the one actually updating the state. It is not, login page is not directly calling set state. It's saying, hey, I'm calling some function you told me to call, and that function is the one calling set state.
So for the routes, you have the component where you're passing the home page right above login. So if you didn't pass in set user info in login page, is that equivalent? Like for the home page, could you just get rid of component homepage, open up the route like you did, and just pass in the element homepage? And is that equivalent?
Yeah, I think I understand the question. Correct me if I'm wrong. So yes, I have component equal homepage. Another way to do this will produce the same results. Routes. If I could spell routes, that'd be good. Yeah, so I could do this like that. This is the same thing as using component the way it's doing it.
Got it.
So usually you just use component if you don't need additional props you need to pass in. The reason I did break it apart because I needed to send additional props. The one thing I broke, and it's not clear here, is that route props automatically gets passed to your login page. So I think this would actually break my homepage. Let me think this quickly. Let me test one thing. But before I test one thing, I'll do it over break. You guys take a break. So it's 10:12. Let's take an 8-minute break. We'll come back. We'll actually get the token value sent with our add Oracle request, verify that works. And then we're going to be talking about the context API. And then our corporate presentation's at 11. So we'll wrap up before then. All right, so take an 8-minute break and let's finish up the lecture after that. See you guys in a bit.